Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 1180th regular meeting and public hearing of the Livonia City Planning Commission. I wish to inform all interested persons in our audience that for petitions on tonight's agenda, which involve a question of zoning, the Planning Commission will make its recommendation to City Council, and the City Council, after holding their own public hearing, will make the final determination as to whether a petition is approved or denied. The Planning Commission holds the only public hearing on requests for preliminary plats and/or vacating petitions. The Commission's recommendation is forwarded to City Council for the final determination as to whether the petition is accepted or rejected. If a petition requesting a waiver of use or a site plan is denied tonight, the petitioner will have 10 days in which to appeal the decision in writing to City Council. Resolutions adopted by the City Planning Commission will become effective 7 days after the date of adoption. The Planning Commission and professional staff have reviewed each of these petitions upon their filing. Staff has furnished the Commission with both approving and denying resolutions, which the Commission may or may not use depending on the outcome of the proceedings tonight. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Smiley.
Present.
Mrs. McHugh.
Here.
Mr. Bonjero.
Here.
Mr. Long is absent. Mr. Ventura.
Is here.
Caramagno's here. Chairman Wilshere.
Is also here, and also with us tonight we have Mark Tormina and Stephanie Reese from our planning staff. We will get into our agenda in just one moment. For the folks in our audience who are here, we only have one petitioner tonight, so it's a pretty easy agenda. What we're going to do is first read out the petition that was filed with us, each agenda item. Our planning staff will give background information on these agenda items, and then we will go to the petitioner to get your comments, get questions answered. If there's anyone else in the audience, which there isn't at the moment, wishing to speak for or against this petition, they'll be welcome to come forward as well, and then we'll make our decision. So with that, we're going to go into item number 1 on our public hearing agenda.
Petition 2021-11-01-08, submitted by Schoolcraft College pursuant to sections 13.13 and 13.15 of Livonia Vision 21 zoning ordinance, requesting to rezone the property at 17950 College Parkway, formerly Unit 15 of College Park Condominium, located on the east side of Haggerty Road between 6 Mile and 7 Mile Road in the southwest quarter of Section 7, from C1 Local Business to PL Public Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Tormina, did you want to talk about item 1 and 2 sort of collectively? We'll still read them out separately and have votes separate, obviously, but.
I can do that, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So this is a request, as was indicated, to rezone property. In this case, it is from C1 Local Business to PL Public Lands, this property. It was formerly described as Unit 15 of College Park site condominium. The property is 2.45 acres in area. It includes roughly 415 feet of frontage along South Drive, which is a private roadway as part of the Schoolcraft College campus. The depth of the site is approximately 245 feet along its east property line. The site is currently vacant. It was approved as Unit 15 with the master deed and bylaws for College Park Condominium in 2003. This request would rezone the property back to its original PL zoning classification. This is largely due to the fact that the property was returned back to Schoolcraft College, and they have future plans to develop the site for college-related purposes. So while this is Unit 15, the companion petition to this involves what was previously described as Unit 11 of College Park Condominium. This site is a little bit smaller. It's roughly a half an acre in size with 200 feet of frontage along College Parkway, a depth of 100 feet. And in this case, the zoning of the property is C4, and the request to rezone the property to the PL public land classification, again, for the same reasons as previously mentioned. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I can read out the correspondence.
Yes, please.
But again, these 3 letters apply to both petitions. The first is a letter of no objection coming from the Office of Treasurer dated November 17th and signed by Linda Shield, City Treasurer of the City of Livonia. Next is a letter of no objection coming from the Department of Finance. That letter is dated November 16th and signed by Connie Cumpula, Chief Accountant. And then lastly, we have a letter dated November 29th from the Engineering Division that reads, in accordance with your request, the Engineering Division has reviewed the above referenced petition. The subject parcels are assigned the address of 17950 College Parkway and 17420 College Parkway. The legal description contained with the petition appears to be correct, with the exception of a typo on one of the bearings. If the petition is approved, the legal description on file with the assessing department should be used as it is the same as the one submitted without the typo. This department does not feel that the change of zoning is appropriate for the subject property, as it would allow for building specifications, signage, coverage, setbacks, et cetera, that would be less stringent than those that were required for the neighboring parcels within the same development. Although we do not foresee any negative impacts to the existing utilities, should the site be developed, the owner will need to provide calculations showing that the proposed development does not exceed the design capacities that were provided by the overall development. The existing parcel currently has access to public water main and sanitary sewer owned by the City of Livonia. Privately owned storm sewer is available within the existing College Park development. The detention for the subject parcel already being provided. That letter is signed by David Lear, Assistant City Engineer, and that is the extent of the correspondence.
Thank you, Mr. Tormina. Is there any questions for our planning staff? If not, our petition, Mr. Ventura.
Mr. Tormina, can you address the part of that first paragraph of Mr. Lear's letter where he talks about not being in favor of this petition because of the differing setback, signage requirements, et cetera? How big an issue is that?
Quite frankly, it's not an issue, I guess, until the land gets developed, in which case I would just simply say that the college is afforded special privileges under the PL zoning as it relates to many of these things. Privileges, when I say that, I mean relaxed standards relative to setbacks and things. So this is inherent with publicly owned properties. The uniqueness of those properties. Most of these projects that are developed by the college are done under their own governmental authority, and for those reasons, I believe the engineering
Is there a
department
way to split the baby here? I mean, if we made an approving resolution tonight and appended it to the effect that the zoning ordinance with regard to signage, setbacks, et cetera, would be complied with, is that kosher?
It would not be. I would not recommend that simply because as a conditional component to a rezoning, I would not entertain that type of language without first conferring with our legal counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Tormina. Thank you, Mr. Wilshere.
Thank you, Mr. Ventura. Any other questions for our planning staff? If not, we'll go to the petitioner, who is in our audience. You're welcome to come forward to our podium. Good evening, Mr. Aion.
Evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. Kevin Aion on behalf of Schoolcraft. So I think I'd like to just address that last letter, if we can, and just generally, our plan for the property is unknown at this time. We don't have plans. We've kicked around ideas. So this unit, the one that's down here, that's this little bit of a wonkier space, the smaller one that's on the screen right now, that's unit 11. A potential thought for that was a storage facility. Schoolcraft's running out of space. So we don't really have intended uses for any of the spaces that we're going to talk about. So this applies across the board. But we're trying to bring it back into the fold for Schoolcraft's property. And one of the things that keeps popping up are the issues of the city's zoning and ordinance and signage and all of that and the setback requirements. And I know it's a little bit odd because normally it's a commercial entity that comes and talks to the planning commission and city council and is going through the process here. Schoolcraft's a little unique. We're our own subdivision of the state, a local unit of government ourselves. We have elected officials, we have our own jurisdiction, We have our own constitutional and statutory authority. So all of that's very well delineated. And all we're trying to do is administratively put this land back into public lands because it's going to be used solely for school purposes.
All right, thank you. Let's see if we have any questions for you from any of our commissioners. Anyone with questions for our petitioner?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Caramagno.
So why now? Being you have no plans, what's the urgency of moving this property now versus once you know what you're going to do with it?
There is no true sense of urgency to get it done now. It was just we're going through the process of cleaning it up, and as we're now dealing with this and we see that this land was not in public lands, we wanted to go ahead and get that into public lands. And at the study meeting, it was brought up that there were 2 other parcels that Schoolcraft owns that are really being used for the training for first responders for the most part. And that's going to be the sequel here. We're going to move to have those lands moved into public lands too, so it's consistent across the board. So I appreciate, Mr. Caramagno, that you had brought that up because I was able to approach it with the president of the school and have that discussion with him. And he said, yeah, absolutely, let's go ahead and get it in public lands. This is our property, we want to use it for our purposes. This is what we're trying to do. So it's more administrative, and it stops us from, also having the ability to sell it to a commercial entity who will then use it for commercial purposes. This is solely going to be used for school purposes. And if we ever wanted to use it for commercial purposes unrelated to the school, we'd have to come before you, and the city would have to accept that back out and to rezone it. So our point is just, listen, let's get it done because it's the school's property and we want to use it for school purposes. It falls under our statutory and constitutional authority anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caramagno. Any other questions for our petitioner? And no other questions for our petitioner? There's no one else in our audience wishing to speak for or against this item, I don't believe. The rest of the folks in our audience are from Schoolcraft. I don't know if any of them wish to speak, but I believe Mr. Aion is representing them adequately.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Caramagno.
I don't know if this is for Mark or for the Schoolcraft folks, but Mark, in general, the properties on the Schoolcraft property are reasonable in size, setback, signage, in general, with some exceptions, or is that not true?
No, that is true. There's been no real issues relative to the development that has occurred on those.
So nothing that's
on the
really.
campus property, relative from a zoning standpoint. I mean, there's some issues related to the signage along I-275. That's that issue. But aside from that, there's really nothing
Too outrageous?
that I can think of. Yeah.
Nothing too outrageous then? No? No, okay. Thank you.
Good question, thank you. Any other questions for either Mr. Tormina or our petitioner? If not, Mr. Aion, is there any final comments you want to make before we vote on this first item?
No, sir.
All right, you can stick around. We're going to get a motion on this first item, which is Unit 15, or formerly known as Unit 15, and then we'll move on to the next one. A motion would be in order at this time.
Mr. Chair, I'll make an approving resolution
All right, Ms. Smiley?
that the request to rezone the property at 17950 College Parkway, formerly Unit 15 of College Park Condominium, from C1 to PL is hereby approved, subject to City Council approval, for the following reasons. The future use and development of this property is intended for Schoolcraft College purposes, and P-L zoning is a more appropriate zoning. That the proposed change of zoning will provide the college an opportunity to develop the subject property in a manner that is consistent with their needs. That the PL zoning is compatible to and in harmony with the existing zoning of the college's main campus, and that the proposed change corresponds to the college's ownership of the subject property.
Is there support?
Support.
We have a motion to approve by Mrs. Smiley, supported by Mrs. McHugh. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, if the secretary is ready, please call the roll.
Mrs. Smiley.
Aye.
Mrs. McHugh.
Aye.
Mr. Bonjero.
Aye.
Mr. Ventura.
Aye.
Caramagno votes aye. Chairman Wilshere.
Votes aye, motion passes. We'll go to city council with an approving recommendation. And that now takes us to the second item on our agenda.
Which is petition 2021-11-01-09 submitted by Schoolcraft College pursuant to sections 1313 and 1315 of Livonia Vision 21 zoning ordinance requesting to rezone the property at 17420 College Parkway, Unit 11 of College Park Condominium, located on the east side of Haggerty Road between 6 and 7 Mile Roads in the southwest quarter of Section 7 from C4 High-Rise Commercial to PL Public Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Mr. Tormina has already given us background on that item with the first one. Is there any further information on this particular petition? Nope. Is there any comments or statements that our petitioner would like to make?
No, sir.
Okay, and there's anybody in the audience wishing to speak for or against? This is a public hearing, so we want to make sure we cover our bases. If not, is there any questions from any of our commissioners? If there's no questions from our commissioners, then a motion would be in order.
Mr. Chair,
Mrs. McHugh.
I'd like to offer an approving resolution that the request to rezone the property at 17420 College Parkway, Unit 11 of College Park Condominium, from C4 to PL is hereby approved, subject to city council approval for the following reasons. Number one, that future use and development of the property is intended for Schoolcraft College purposes and PL zoning is a more appropriate zoning. Number two, that the proposed change of zoning will provide the college an opportunity to develop the subject property in a manner that is consistent with their needs. Number three, that PL zoning is compatible to and in harmony with the existing zoning of the college's main campus. And number four, that the proposed change corresponds to the college's ownership of the subject property.
And is there support for that?
Support.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Mrs. McHugh, supported by Mr. Bonjero. Is there any discussion on this motion? If not, the secretary can please call the roll on the motion to approve.
Mrs. McHugh.
Aye.
Mr. Bonjero.
Aye.
Mrs. Smiley.
Aye.
Mr. Ventura.
Aye.
Caramagno votes aye. Chairman Wilshere.
Votes aye, motion passes. We'll go on to city council with an approving recommendation. And that now takes us to the third item on our agenda.
That's petition 2021-11-01-10 submitted by Schoolcraft College pursuant to sections 1313 and 1315 of the Livonia Vision 21 zoning ordinance, requesting to rezone the property at 13,001 Merriman Road, located on the west side of Merriman Road between Glendale and Schoolcraft, in the northeast quarter of Section 27 from M2 General Manufacturing to PL Public Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We'll go back to Mr. Tormina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, again, is a request by Schoolcraft College to rezone a property that it owns and utilizes for educational purposes. In this case, the property is on Merriman Road. It's actually the south or the northwest corner of Glendale Avenue and Merriman Road. This property is just over 3 acres in area. It has 190 feet of frontage on Merriman Road by a depth of roughly 765 feet. This property contains a roughly 48,000 square foot former manufacturing facility. It is now used as part of the college's manufacturing and engineering center. The subject property is shown on our master plan as tech and manufacturing. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to read out the correspondence.
Yes, please.
Again, a letter of no objection coming from the Office of Treasurer dated November 17th and signed by Linda Shield, Treasurer of the city. Letter of no objection from the Department of Finance dated November 16th and signed by Connie Compula, Chief Accountant. And lastly, a letter from the Engineering Division dated November 29th that reads, in accordance with your request, the Engineering Division has reviewed the above referenced petition. The subject parcel is assigned the address of 13001 Merriman Road, and the legal description contained with the petition appears to be correct. This department does not feel the change of zoning is appropriate for the subject property, as it would allow for building specifications, signage, coverage, setbacks, etc., that would be less stringent than those that were required for the neighboring parcels within the same development. The existing parcel currently has access to public water main and sanitary sewer owned by the city of Livonia. Privately owned storm sewer is available within the existing parcel. At this time, there is nothing that would indicate negative impacts to any of the existing utilities since the petition is for zoning purposes. Should the site be redeveloped or additional construction planned, the owner would need to submit drawings to this department to determine if permits will be required. That letter is signed by David Lear, Assistant City Engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Taormina. Any questions for our planning staff? No questions? Well, Mr. Ventura.
Mr. Taormina, in the event that Schoolcraft College were to sell this building, it would come before us to be rezoned back to tech and engineering or one of the zoning categories that would be other than PL.
Most
Correct.
likely M2 in this case.
And then it would be subject to all of the ordinances of the city of Livonia.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Wilshere.
Thank you, Mr. Ventura. Any other questions? If not, we'll go to our petitioner again. Good evening.
Evening again. Thank you, guys. So this building is actually fully built out. It's a fantastic facility for vocational and trades. It has our plastics, it has CAD. Lots of hands-on learning takes place here. If anyone hasn't visited this building, we welcome anyone, and we'll give you a visit to walk through, because this is truly a gem. It's unfortunate it's not on the main campus, that it's a little bit further away, but this area has kind of become almost a little satellite with some of our other more hands-on programs like that. And so again, same as before, it's schoolcraft purposes. We want to keep it there in public lands, as Mr. Taormina pointed out. If we wanted to change this and sell the building, we'd have to get it pulled out of public lands. We have no intention of doing that at this time. Obviously, who knows what the future holds. It actually makes it harder to sell once we put it into public lands, because it's a process to get it out, to come back here for anyone who would have to buy it. So it's kind of almost cementing it as our uses and gives a lot more control back to the Planning Commission for if it ever goes back to any type of commercial use.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions for our petitioner regarding this property? I don't see any questions from any of our commissioners. There's no one in our audience, I believe, wishing to speak for or against this. We'll give you final word. Is there any final comments you'd like to make?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. With that, then, I'll go to the commission for a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Bonjero.
I'd like to offer an approving resolution that the request to rezone the property at 13001 Merriman Road from M2 to PL is hereby approved, subject to city council approval for the following reasons. That the current use of the property is for educational purposes for which PL zoning is more appropriate zoning. That a change to PL is compatible to and in harmony with the surrounding industrial and PL zoning in the area, and that the proposed change corresponds to the college's ownership of the subject property.
Oh, thank you. And is there support?
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Bonjero and a support from Mrs. McHugh to approve. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, the secretary can call the roll.
Mr. Bonjero.
Aye.
Mrs. McHugh.
Aye.
Mrs. Smiley.
Aye.
Mr. Ventura.
Aye.
Caramagno votes aye. Chairman Wilshere.
Votes aye. Motion passes. We'll go to city council. And thank you for coming this evening. We wish you well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. That concludes the public hearing section of our agenda. We now move on to one more item on our agenda, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, approval of the minutes of the 1,179th public hearing and regular meeting held by the Planning Commission on November 30th, 2021.
All right, and do we have someone wishing to approve those?
I move that we approve the minutes.
All right, and do we have support?
Support.
And Mr. Ventura. So we have an approval by Smiley, supported by Ventura. If there's no objection, I think we can safely show 6 to approve those. I don't see any objections, so we'll mark that as completed. And that takes us to the end of our agenda. Is there any other business to come before the commission? If not, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Ventura and supported by
Support.
Mr. Bonjero. And again, if there's no objection, I think we can safely show 6 to adjourn the meeting this evening. I see no objections, and with that, we are at the end of our meeting this evening. I do want to thank my colleagues, our planning staff, and even Livonia Television staff for helping us bring these meetings to the community throughout the year. It's been a challenging year for a lot of people, but we've had some really good things happen this year as well. Mainly the enactment of a new zoning ordinance, and we've had a number of other petitions come through this body over the last year that has really helped the community. So I think that even though it's been a difficult year, it's been productive. We went through a time with meetings on Zoom. We're back here in person. So we've gone through a lot of different challenges, and we're doing well. So I want to thank everyone for helping with that, and certainly want to wish everyone in the community a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holiday, and a Happy New Year. This will be our last meeting for the year. So with that, we'll note that the meeting has been adjourned at 7:27 p.m. and wish a very good night to everyone in Livonia.